Welcome everyone. I am Gabe Wilson. I am the curator of exhibitions and collections here at BRAHM, and I'm so grateful that you've all decided to join us tonight for this artist talk. We have the opportunity, the rare opportunity to actually receive an artist talk in the midst of the exhibition that it's about. That doesn't always often happen here at BRAHM, and we're really thrilled that Jan will have his references all around him as he's working through his conversation with all of you. But to just give you a little introduction about what we'll be doing this evening, we're all here to listen for a little while to Jan Lukens. Jan is a painter of many things, not just horses, though that's most of what you're going to see here today. Most of all, he is a student of art history, of the techniques and strategies for capturing the contours and nuances of the world around him. Jan has worked diligently to perfect this skill set with an education including the Lime Academy of Fine Arts, the National Academy of Design, an independent study at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and a career that spans decades. When Jan's work came to my attention, the parallels between his equestrian paintings and BRAHM's exhibition celebrating the centennial of the Blowing Rock Charity Horse Show, currently installed on the rest of the upper floor of the museum, those parallels were immediately obvious. These paintings and the care with which Jan renders them are the perfect supplement to our horse show narrative. These pictures quite literally enliven the story and the history we are working to commemorate here this summer. I'm so pleased that Jan is joining us, and I'm grateful that he's willing to share more about his own artistic practice and the work we have installed here in BRAHM's Alexander Community Gallery. So now, please join me in welcoming Jan Lukens.
Thank you. Appreciate all of you coming here. I'm a little new to this, giving artist talks, so I'm going to do my best. Gabe has asked me to focus on my studio practice, which I've never discussed before, so again, bear with me. And I thought it would be interesting. I've been an artist my whole life. When I was 6 years old, everybody else was doing stick figures and I was drawing things that looked like what I was trying to draw. And by the time I was 10, I was doing portraits of the Beatles for my classmates. So it's always been my favorite thing to do, and what I was best at, and also what I was better at than most people. So it was an easy thing to choose as a career. To establish a career, you have to, and move out of your parents' house, you have to find a way to make art and pay your bills, which is a pretty tough job for most artists. And I chose commercial art to start with. And that was the beginning of my convoluted path. So I'm going to show you a few slides now to show you what I was doing when I started out in commercial art in the mid-'80s, and I started painting horses in 1992. So this is just to give you an idea of the massive transition I went through when I started painting horses. This was an early illustration that was done for a campaign for a bank I think they're in 3 or 4 states, but the ad agency I was working for was in Greensboro. And there were several illustrations like this that were part of the project. You know, when you're an illustrator, your project is to please the person that hired you. And a lot of times that's a whole group of people. That's the art director that hired you, their boss, the creative director, the sales rep that brought the job in from the client, and then of course maybe a boardroom of clients that all have to pass judgment on your work. I have a long history association with Carolina Theater. It's built in 1927 in Greensboro. It's a spectacular facility, and they almost burned down back in the 70s. There was a grassroots organization that put it back together, and then they did a big fundraiser, and they brought in a New York firm to do a complete renovation and take it back to its former glory. So it was closed for a couple years, and their first event was a silent film festival. And this was the poster that I came up with. I don't know whether you can see it from there, but it's, of course, Buster Keaton and the General on the screen, but it's Charlie Chaplin playing the organ alongside. So this is something I was doing then, both the graphic design and also the illustration at that time. And not working in color yet, still working in black and white. Then I started working in Prismacolor pencil, which is kind of like if you merged a crayon with a colored pencil, this is what you get. It's very waxy, but it's more opaque, and you can get more vibrant colors. And at that point, I was scared to death of painting, so it worked well for me. This was for a Jack Nicklaus golf club, an ad agency that was doing a brochure. Supported. This is another piece for the Carolina Theater, and this is right at the end of my all Prismacolor, and then the black was India ink phase. David Sanborn on saxophone. And then this is another jazz fest that I did with a more talented art director, because it wasn't me. And I did the illustration. Chuck Mangione, you may remember him. He was like a one-hit wonder. They used his song for the Olympics one year, and you couldn't get away from it for about a year. And that was my Hawaiian shirt that he was wearing. Give a little tropical feel. This was, we had a group of about 100 advertising creatives that would meet once a month and bring in national talents, the most widely respected, award-winning photographers, art directors, creative directors, illustrators. We had a guy from a big agency in Chicago that was scheduled to come in and talk to us, and he bailed on us and said he had to work. And somebody found out that he was playing golf in Hawaii. So he agreed to come back. And this is what I came up with to illustrate. And the copy's hilarious, but I'm not going to read it to you. So that was my black and white, my color local work, and then I started getting some national work. This was an illustration of Spike Lee for The New Yorker. Jay Leno for The New Yorker. And there were 3 big advertising clients in the Greensboro, Winston-Salem, High Point area. R.J. Reynolds, who still was doing sports marketing at the time, Planters, Peanuts, and also Hanes. And so this was a piece I did for, Mr. Peanut for Planters. But it was around that time that I was kind of fed up with advertising illustration. I averaged pulling 3 all-nighters a month. It would take me 2 days to recover from each of those, so I was basically spending a week every month as a zombie. And I had an ethical issue with using my talent to market cigarettes. And the campaign that kind of sealed the deal for me was the Joe Camel campaign, which is also the campaign where they lost their right to do television advertising and sponsor sporting events. But I quit, and I had to, I had a mortgage to pay, and it was 65% of my business was for RJR. So I had to figure out what I was going to do, and I weighed two options. I thought animals, so I looked real hard at wildlife art, but it turned out that most of the top wildlife artists were doing like 3 paintings a year, and then they either got a small percentage from a publishing company, or they spent $10,000 to make prints and envelopes and do some kind of marketing campaign. I wanted to do more than 3 paintings a year. So I had this idea, people that own horses would probably be interested in paintings of their horses. And so I reached out to a friend who referred me to a trainer who's probably here, Parker Barker, who's she's remarried. She's now Parker Minchin, but she invited me over, and she had all her horses groomed and ready for me to photograph. And this was after several people I knew through advertising who rode horses, were too busy to do this. So I did a bunch of paintings, and I came to Blowing Rock Charity Horse Show in July. Oh, sorry, I got ahead of myself. This was the last advertising illustration I did. This was for, I forgot that I found that this morning. This is the Winston Eagle, and if it looks pretty bizarre, that's because it is. The project was to do an illustration that would be used as a billboard, and then they were going to have a neon artist come in and lay in thin neon tubes on every section of the painting that I did, so that during the day you'd see my illustration, at night you'd see the neon. So that was the last illustration that I did. And then I came to the Blowing Rock Charity Horse Show. Now, isn't that a fancy booth? I'll tell you. Yeah, that was it. They have, I don't know if you've been over there, but they have a lot of vendors that they put in the old stables. And I don't know whether you can see it, behind the white horse there in the center, there's a window with it opens and closes. It's just a board, that closes up the window, and that's for the, just to give air and let the horse stick its head down if it wants to. But yeah, that was July 1992. Okay, so this was my first equestrian portrait, done on spec, and this was Parker's daughter, who is a trainer, and she's probably at this horse show, Jennifer Barker. She's a trainer out of the Columbia, South Carolina area now. But this was her horse, Cupid's Arrow. And as I well, if you look around here, you can probably tell I still had a lot of my advertising technique, from the transition. And that was something I immediately recognized. All right, I was being paid in advertising to do things that were very slick and polished and realistic. And literally sometimes I was tasked to paint a product, either a cigarette pack or a lifesaver roll, that didn't exist yet, and they were going to do a whole marketing campaign on my illustration. So that's how that's why my skill set was valued by them, because I liked detail, I liked making things realistic. And so when I started with horses, I was like, okay, it's realistic, it's lifelike, but it's really slick. And when I looked at all the other painters, they were very painterly, and they weren't even working in the same medium I was working in. This is acrylics and still Prismacolor pencil. I would finish off the details with that. And eventually I get away from it, but at this point when I started out, that's what I was working in. This was, I think, my third commission for a client in Maryland. This is a couple years down the road. I'm starting to introduce watercolor to my technique and paint the whole thing in watercolor. Then, in watercolor, the reason I don't like working in it exclusively is that's a translucent medium, so it's very hard to get opaque colors. You can you reach a point as you put paint down where it just gets muddy. And that's what I like about acrylics, that you can get the opaque colors that I wanted. Again, getting a little more, I think painterly, at least trying to get there with the same medium. This one is almost all watercolor at this point. I'm trying to get away from acrylics. And I think just the very darkest blacks there are acrylic. Everything else is watercolor. This is all watercolor. So I stepped away from the acrylics, and I was pretty happy with the way this looked. But I started really looking hard at the most successful portrait painters. The most successful artists throughout history that have painted realistically, and they all worked in oil on canvas. So I thought, well, I need to make that transition. And I tried to do it myself, experimenting and taking workshops, and it just wasn't happening. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna have to go back to school. And that's what I did. Went to Lime Academy. I moved up to Connecticut to a little artist colony called Old Lyme. And Old Lyme is famous. They call it an artist colony because it was very popular when all the affluent people who collected art in New York City and in Boston would go to their summer homes. The artists, a lot of the galleries would shut down, so the artists would go to Old Lyme, which is right in the middle between those, like an hour and a half either direction by train. And there was a woman named Florence Griswold that had a boarding house that was very artist friendly, and she let all of them stay there. And they would go out and paint the beautiful landscapes and seascapes around there. And they would barter art for their board, over the summer. It worked really well for everybody. So the reason I went there is not only did all my heroes paint in oil on canvas, but they also, dating back to the Renaissance, they had classic academic training. And that is drawing and painting from the live model, studying anatomy, and studying art history. So I researched a lot of schools, and I liked Lime Academy because it was, for a lot of reasons, and I'd never lived on the coast before, but it also was accredited, so that meant I could get, low interest federal loans, I could get grants, I could get scholarships, and whereas the other ateliers that were set up to teach this classic academic training were basically done out of very large artist studios, and so there were no ways to finance this. So I took the plunge. I moved up to Old Lyme. I rented a bungalow, which was triple what I was paying in North Carolina, and I added 40 hours a week to my schedule, and I supported myself by continuing to paint my equestrian portraits, because I would bring those in the summertime, and then work. I would usually get a year's worth of business, and then I would gradually finish those off and ship them out to my clients. So that's how I supported myself. the whole time I was at Old Line, but the first year I took art history, and I love art history, and I did really well at it, but it took so much of my time that the second year I decided to not take it and just take studio classes. And I wound up drawing and painting from the live model over 1,000 hours. And I probably increased my skill set fivefold during that time. It was just, it was amazing. Another life drawing from the same time period. So there was a gentleman from Africa that took the train up for one session, and that I studied drawing with, and he taught me how to construct the figure within the picture plane in like a third the time it had been taking me. And so I had 2/3 more time to develop my life drawings. So all of a sudden, I'm doing much better life drawings and getting some attention for it. So I thought, well, if he could do that with my drawing, I wonder what he could do with my painting. And he taught at the National Academy of Design in New York, which is why I moved up there, and it was to study with him. So I spent the summer of 2001 looking for housing, and I finally lucked out, and one of my clients had a friend that had a huge, by New York City standards, 2,400 square feet with a fireplace and a doorman and the whole bit, brass railings, marble floors, at 90th and Broadway. And she had a spare bedroom with its own full bath, and also a door that would close it off from the rest of the apartment, so it's perfect. And a student affordable price. And that was right across Central Park from the National Academy, which was at 89th Street on the east side. So, I'm getting ahead of myself again. This is my last life painting, my figure painting at BRAHM Academy. This was the long pose, so we worked on this or we each got to work on our own paintings for several weeks. But I guess this is the first paint, this is the first paint I've shown where I was working in oil on canvas. And that's where I learned to work in oil on canvas. That's where I moved to, in New York. So I moved to the 11th floor of that building, Astor Place. Interesting place. When John Jacob Astor went down with the Titanic, his son was at Yale, and he inherited all his dad's money. So he said, I don't really need to be a college student anymore. I think I'll be an architect. So this was his first building, and it's really amazing. Are you familiar with Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window? Okay, so that apartment building has a garden courtyard, which is very rare in New York City because developers want to maximize every penny of space. That one had a garden courtyard, which was really amazing. And my apartment, this is Broadway running across this way. My apartment was up on the corner on the 11th floor, and I think it's a 13th floor or something like that. So 2 years before, I was living on a 600-acre farm by myself outside of Louisville, North Carolina, which has one stoplight, and then I'm living there. So it was wild. So I moved there on September 10th, 2001, which was when all the college students, the first Monday after Labor Day is traditionally the first day of fall. And I went to my first class, and the next day was September 11th. So it was a weird time. But I studied with this guy, Burton Silverman, very famous artist. I knew him as an illustrator, but he also was very successful in the fine art world, selling through galleries. Amazing guy. I made copies of Velázquez at the Met, and I wish I had $5 for everybody in hundreds of languages that asked me, "Where's his head? Why didn't you paint his head?" And the reason was, you have to sign up with the copyist department at the Met, and you leave your painting there all the time, and they have size restrictions. It was 36 inches, and that's a vertical painting, so I thought, well, let's just do it 36 by 36 and crop the guy's head off. So it's one of the best paintings I've ever done. I can't take credit for it because I'm just copying what Velázquez did, but it was as good as any class I ever took. This was another Velázquez I copied in February of 2002. At that time, it was just called Portrait of a Gentleman by School of Velázquez. But it's since been authenticated as one of his works, so that was pretty cool. And then I started painting oil and canvas once I got out of school. So this was one of my first ones. So these are all, I hadn't started working big yet. So most of these paintings are between 16 by 20 and 24 by 30. This one was a little bigger. This one was 42 inches tall, I think, which is really big for me back then. This one is 24 by 30. So I think that was the largest painting I'd done at that time. The twins' mother was a very famous trainer and outside of Cincinnati, and she commissioned me to do this. So I flew up to their farm to photograph them, and I was really proud when I finished it because it was so darn big. And of course, all these little kids are still riding, and probably their kids are riding now. This portrait brought in a lot of work for me because people that had 2 horses or 2 ponies looked at it and said, "Oh, yeah, okay." And of course, I got paid by the figure, so they were that was nice for me too. But I loved the way this one turned out, especially with the stone wall in the back. That's in Connecticut. She's here at this show. This show's 14 now. So this is Ernie Orr. Betty Orr has had a very long history with Little Rock Charity Horse Show. She's probably been riding here 70 years and still winning her classes. She's amazing. This is on their farm in Warrenton, Virginia. And she only commissioned me to paint the horse, but I liked the way it looked with Ernie, so I said, "What do you think about leaving Ernie in the painting? I won't charge you anymore." And she said, "That's a great idea, because I'm the rider in the family, and he never gets any attention. I get all the attention." So he got it for his Christmas present. It's pretty cool.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It's another Virginia rider. I think you can see I'm starting to get into the oil and the differences, with being able to play with brushwork. So of course this one was influenced by the one I talked about with the stone wall. And her mother's an author, and we still stay in touch. All of these are happening between 2002 and 2008. It's a very famous stallion that has sired a lot of hunters. He was at a farm outside of Cleveland, Ohio. All the gold. He had a private paddock and a lake. It's revered. This guy, Jeff, was an advertising executive. He was partners in an ad agency in Minneapolis. Decided he loved, he was ready to retire early, and he had to figure out a way to support his expensive hobby of show jumping. So he learned how to do dental work on horses. And I don't think he got any, I don't even think he studied with another dentist, that he just started doing it. And he was booked up for months in advance. He apparently was very successful at it, whatever he was doing in their mouth. This is a famous jumper. Another painting influence, you know. Also has a stone wall. This was on a beautiful 19th century farm outside of Philadelphia. These people were absolutely lovely. So again, all these, unless I pointed it out, like large at that time for me was like 30 by 40 inches. So I noticed something about what was happening with my career. You know, I was staying very busy. I was happy with my income. And I asked one of the equestrians I made friends with, you know, I do all these portraits of kids for the parents, and I see all the famous riders around, but they never come in my booth, and they never commission anything from me. And this person had been riding since she was 5 years old and said, well, that's because they expect you to do it for free. And I said, all right, you know, I would do that because there's a certain element of a portrait painter's reputation that's based on not how good his work is, but who he's worked for, who he's painted. So, okay, so I had a friend introduce me to Chris Kapler, who was killing it on the circuit with a horse named Royal Caliber, and was on his way to go into the Olympics. And in fact, he was preparing for the 2004 Olympics when I was introduced to him. So he gave me a photograph that he already had. And fortunately, it was someone I was friends with that worked for a weekly equestrian magazine called The Chronicle of the Horse. And she okayed it, and it went very well. The owners of the horse, and frequently that's the case, you have the owners of the horse and then you have the riders. And no matter how famous they are, usually they're not the owners of the horse. They may be partners, and sometimes they're the owners of the horse, but a lot of times they're not. And that was the case here. So he came up with the owners, Hal and Kathy Kamine, and they commissioned this, or they bought it from me, and then they commissioned another one, which was Chris competing at the Pan Am Games that year, where he won a gold medal. So it gets better. They donated this one to the United States Equestrian Federation, where they hang it in their headquarters. And it's one of the very few paintings that's there. You know, they have sections that commemorate each Olympics, and This one is in the middle of the 2004 Olympics presentation with a bunch of 8 by 10 black and white photographs around it. So that was impressive. And the 2004 Olympics, I don't know whether you remember, but the Irish rider who won the gold medal was, or the Irish team, there was a rider on the Irish team who won the team gold medal, who was disqualified for illegal drug use. But he fought it, and it took like 2 years for the United States to win to actually be presented their gold medal. So this was in 2006, and that's me with Chris Kaplan, the painting. And he won the silver medal that year because Royal Caliber came up playing during the jump off for the gold medal. A guy named Rodrigo Pessoa, who has lived here for a long time, but he rides for his native country, Brazil, won. And that name will come up again. This was the entire Olympic team with both my paintings behind them at the presentation. So that was a shining moment. So this is another person that, very famous writer, Margie Goldstein Engel, that I asked if I could do a painting of her for free. And she said, sure. And we took some photographs, and then I forget his name, it's something like Rauschenberger, but the guy who was the editor of the Chronicle of the Horse at that time had taken this photograph of her at the Olympics in Sydney, and it was in black and white, and it had some weird stuff happening beside the fence, but other than that, I just thought it was fantastic. I loved it. And I was a little prejudiced towards photographs of show jumpers not jumping, because it seems like that's all they want to see is the perfect jump with the perfect tuck, and clearance over the jump. And I thought, yeah, but everything else is so beautiful. So she's coming around, getting ready to take a jump here, and so this was purchased by the horse's owner, and then it was used for the program for the Winter Equestrian Festival, which is the largest equestrian competition in the world. It happens every winter from early January to early April in Wellington, Florida, which has grown considerably in 31 years I've been doing this. I think there's 15,000 horses a year that compete each season, and there's an average of 20 people attached to each horse. So, there's a lot of people there. Yeah, a lot of people that love horses down there. They put this painting on the cover of the program in 2008, and I was there for 3 weeks, and I was busy from the time I opened till the time I closed. I did double my very best show, and I left there thinking, I'm immune to the recession. Everybody else is suffering, but I was so smart to pick this group, to market to, because they've got financial managers. I'm golden. That's me with Margie, and a print of the painting that I would show, at my vendor booth. That's me thinking, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. This is awesome. That's what so remember my first horse show booth. Yeah, it's improved a little bit. I got the Oriental rug, everything, lights, cameras. Nice little sign there. Yeah. So one of the people that commissioned work for me at that show in 2008 was a couple from New York who also had a home in the Hamptons. Young couple, early 30s. And this was her horse, and it had been photographed by a very famous fashion photographer. I think it's Michael Klein. I mean, he's a fashion photographer, but he's also huge in the fine art world. He's had like museum shows. And he took this photograph, or he was commissioned to take this photograph, and then they went to him and said, can you do a big print of it? We want one that's like 4 by 5 feet. He said, absolutely not. So then she walked into my booth. She said, would you paint this at 4 by 5 feet? And I said, sure, In secret, I thought, that's crazy. So I did it, and of course, it was, I wish I'd been paying more attention, because that was early 2008, and it took me a few years to figure out that, oh yeah, this would be a good thing to do. So after 2008, I did have some nice things happen. This is Rodrigo Pessoa and his wife. She is the daughter of a big collector of mine, Bill Weeks, who has, I think, about 9 of my paintings, and he commissioned this in 2010. This is a painting. It's got a long title, but it explains what it is. So the Upperville Horse Show rivals Blowing Rock for being the oldest horse show in the country. They apparently they stopped running during the Civil War, but one of the differences is this is the hunter ring. That giant oak tree is in the middle of the hunter ring. You don't see that at other horse shows. It's on Mr. Mellon's farm, who was a big sporting art collector, of course, Mellon Bank. So they have a lot of, it's a very traditional show, and they love their traditions. And one of the classes that they have that people compete in is called the family class. And you have to be, I think you have to be the same family. I don't think even cousins can ride together. I'm not sure about that. But, this was a big client of mine, Michael Smith, who has moved to Middleburg since then, with his then wife, that's important, and his daughter on the right, and then his son on the left. And you can see they're all dressed exactly the same. They're all riding beautiful bay horses, probably with the same tack. Everybody's got their eyes on him, which is probably what he told them, keep your eye on me, because it's like synchronized swimming. You're judged on how well you keep it, you stay synchronized. So they won, fortunately. I took this as they were coming around the arc of the oval, and he commissioned the painting, and about, I guess I was probably 80% through, and I reached out to him and said, hey, I'm getting close, just want to give you a heads up. And he said, oh, there's a problem. My wife and I split up. So he said, let me get through this. Let me get through the court proceedings, and then I'll purchase it, but we'll have to figure something else out. And so he did. True to his word, he got in touch with me, and he said, I can't have that in my house, and I don't want it in the city I live in. I will buy it from you, but I need you to find an institution that will take it. And so I first went to Virginia Museum of Fine Art because they had a sporting art gallery of artwork that Andrew Mellon had donated. Probably the biggest sporting art collector in the history of the United States. And but he had a qualification that no contemporary art could be added to the collection. So they steered me towards the National Sporting Library and Museum in Middleburg, Virginia, and they accepted it. So that was my first painting that went into the permanent collection of the museum, which was nice to have happen. This is a collector of mine in Monroe, North Carolina. She also has, I think, 9 paintings. And she likes to have her horses portrayed with her property in the background. Then I started painting big horses. And that's pretty much what I've been doing since 2013. This horse and this one were sold to Ralph Lauren in 2014, and that was the biggest thing that happened to me after the recession. That kind of brought me back in. And literally when people found out that my painting's been purchased by Ralph Lauren, my phone didn't stop ringing for a year and a half. It was really sweet. And like I said, sometimes it's about who you work for. This was just purchased recently by the writer's husband as a present for her, because she'd been bugging him for a couple of years about it. I don't know this horse's name, but I called it Luna because it just looked like it was a moonlit night. This was sold to a couple of dear friends of mine who have never been on a horse in High Point, North Carolina. They just like my work. This is a horse I painted for the K-Mines, who introduced me to Chris Kapler and took me to the Olympic presentation. And this is what Twilight, the big black horse back here with the blue background, that's what he looks like in full length. And that was sold to a client in Bedford Hills, New York, and there it is in his dining room, along with Bugatti. Another painting on. The owner of this horse is here at the horse show. And this is kind of interesting. And this is the last painting I'm going to show you before I show you some how I work, how I create these things. I got a phone call from an art consultant in Los Angeles in 2018, and she asked me to bid on a large painting project of, and she sent me some photographs, and so I gave her a bid, and I was used to people in Greensboro flinching at my prices, after I, had lived in the New York area. So when I gave her my price and she went, oh, I thought, here we go again. And she said, that's just not going to do. And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, the person you're competing against, their prices start at $30,000. And I said, oh, well, how about if we double it? She said, that's much better. So, and that's the first time in my career that's happened. And it was a little bit extra work. I had to do some studies, and I paid for the shipping box and shipping. But yeah, that was amazing. And this went to a client in Beverly Hills. Okay, so that's my studio at Revolution Mill. So my studio's in Greensboro. It's a 1903 flannel mill that a credit union in Durham, North Carolina, that is one of the largest black-owned companies in the country, takes their money and invests it into historic properties and turns them into mixed-use facilities. And they get a big tax break because they're minority owned, and they get a big tax break because they're restoring historic properties. They put $90 million into this property, and it is amazing. I'm very fortunate to be there, but what reeled me in was, if anybody here who paints knows how important north light is. And the reason it's important is that it's the only consistent light all day long. Sun comes up, comes up in the east, goes across southern sky, and goes down the west. It's pretty consistent to the north, so that's what you want. And I have 2 6 by 12 foot north light windows with 18-foot ceilings. So it's a pretty wonderful place to work. Okay, so my setup for painting is I put the canvas in front of me. I used to print out a bunch of 8.5 by 11 glossy photographs with all the details I thought I would need to complete the painting, and then I would either tape them or clip them to my easel. I did this for years. I also worked from just 4 by 6 photographs for years and years until I got my first digital camera and printer, and that was incredible. But then, and one of the nice things about working with other artists, I noticed that my neighbor was using a setup like this, which is a mobile presentation stand to put like a monitor or TV on top, with a shelf to put a laptop. And so what I would do is shoot my reference photos, bring them up in Photoshop, which of course, then is projected on the screen in front of me. And the nice thing about that is I don't need to spend $200 a month on printing ink anymore. And it's just, all I have to do is hit enlarge or reduce for details. So it's really, really made my life easier. So I pull it up on the screen beside me. If you remember the photograph of my studio setup, the window's over here, and then I sit or stand right in front of the easel, and then I have this to my left, and I'm looking back and forth the same way you would as if you had a model over there. So that's the beginning of, this painting is not in the exhibition, but this is the one I have the most sequence photos of. And you'll notice I've already, can't get away from the mic. I've already made some changes here. I originally had the muzzle of the horse longer, and I shortened it, and I originally had the arms too far forward, and I wiped that out and brought it back, and so that's something I learned in art school. This is the part of my painting that I call drawing with a paintbrush, because I'm getting that initial image down, just the outline of the shapes. Just trying to make sure it fits in on the picture plane the way I want it to, and then I move on from there. So this is a close-up of that. And you can see all my corrections are on there, but still on canvas it doesn't matter. It's all going to get covered up anyway. This is the next step where I just simply blocked in the dark color so that I can get closer to see how the finished painting is going to turn out. And so it's still showing. I'm starting to clean it up, but you're still seeing some of my correction marks there on the canvas. Now I'm adding a little bit of color. See what I want to do with it. Some midtones and the highlights on the horse's face. A little more color. You can see the color in the rider's jacket, a little color in the riding blanket, a little more accuracy. Just starting to put a little color down on top of the background, figure out what I wanted to do. I did this and immediately stepped back from it and said, it's just too yellow. I thought it'd be interesting because there was so much, there was like a dark blue in the horse in the jacket, but it was just too much. So I toned it down and I started to like it better. I thought, I now want to knock it back a little further, and that's what I finished up with. So, okay, this one is that horse right there. That's how it started. It was very, you know, trying to get these shapes right. Sometimes it's a very mechanical process. It almost looks like a robot horse there. But I knew how I was going to make it fit in the picture plan. So that's actually the very next day, and that's just laying in the browns and blacks, you know, which is what I do first. Is I lay in the darkest colors thinly, so that if I want to change something, it's easier to change. This is where it's tightened up a lot, and I did like a trial background, and I thought I wanted to do something a little more interesting than that. I liked it, but thought a little more color, and I think that's how we ended up. I like doing a transitionary background where it's a little darker on the bottom than it is on top. Okay, and this is Belladonna over there. This is how she started out. It's very rough and loose with thin paint. And I'm just using, actually, I got taught this way, and this is the way I paint. I only use thinner. I don't use anything else. I don't add anything to the paint. And part of that is that a lot more people see the photographs of my work than see the actual paintings. And so to them, that photograph painting, that is the painting to them. And when you start adding things to paint with, they can take on a glossy surface, which makes it difficult to get accurate photographs. So that's one of the reasons. But I also was taught that way. You know, just keep it simple. Thin it enough to make it fluid, and you know, when you want really opaque colors, paint right out of the tube. It's fine. So again, you know, as I work, I'm trying to clean things up. I'm trying to get closer to my goal, which is a nice range of values on a dramatically lit horse. And I was pretty sure I wanted to do a blue background, so I just had that very loose, straight out of the tube. I think it's ultramarine blue. More values, tightening things up. Changing the background, something hopefully a little more dramatic, tightening it up. That's the last one. And it looks just like that one. And that's it. So,
Great.
so I'm going to take a sip of water, but I would be very happy to answer any questions that you have. None? Great. Oh. Okay.
I've got a question.
Okay.
You are able to capture so much emotion in these horses' expressions. I think about like Twilight over there, or the white one on the front left wall. So, how do you do that? Is it something like when you're taking the photo, you just try and get like the most charismatic eyes of the horse, or are those embellishments you make when you're working on it?
That's a good question, because people say to me all the time, you captured the personality of that horse. It's amazing. Like, thanks, you know. When you're, okay, I'm obviously very dependent on my photographic reference. I taught myself how to draw by copying photographs in my parents' magazines, mainly National Geographic and Newsweek. And so, you know, even though I did 2 years of study drawing from the live model and really increased my skill set, I had girls whose parents wanted portraits that refused to pose for a 10-minute portrait photo reference session. So imagine telling them I'm going to need about 12 hours total for her to stand there with her 1,200-pound horse, you know, to paint. It's not going to happen. So I'm a pretty good photographer. I'm definitely a good photographer for what I need, which is reference for paintings. You know, the advantage I have is that the photograph is not my final art. So, but when I'm commissioned to a painting, I take usually a couple hundred photographs, and then I'll go through them, weed out the bad ones, and find the ones that really are the most flattering of the horse. It may capture their personality, but just like a dog, you know, and I do a lot of paintings of dogs, portraits, you have to have someone getting the horse's attention. And there's like sometimes, you know, just a straight horizontal works well. In my opinion, straight on with a horse never works, and that's because the eyes are on the sides of their heads, you know, and the eyes are definitely, like humans, they're probably the most beautiful thing, you know, beautiful of their features. So I have somebody who is holding the reins, and then I have someone who's getting the attention of the horse. And they can do all kinds of things to get their attention, from throwing grass up in the air to holding a big lighter underneath their nose to squeaking a toy. I even had somebody, actually I was with another equestrian photographer who had a portable recorder that had horses whinnying on it, and cranked it up, you know, set it on where she wanted the horse to look, and then she said, "Watch this," you know, and it was fantastic. And after we finished the session, I said, "That's fantastic. I want to get one of those. Where did I get it?" And she went, "You promise not to tell anyone?" I said, "All right, I guess I am."
You are.
That's me. So that was her. But you've got, so, you know, all of these horses, and even when they're riding, you know, like I'll weed out the ones where they put their ears back. I want to get the most they're always, you know, when they're riding and they're, especially if they're looking at a jump ahead, they're always like, they're really focused. So if you get a good angle on them, you know, it's easy to capture their expression, and I'm very selective about how the horse looks. I mean, to me, it's like a portrait of a person, you know. You want them to look as good as they possibly can, and trust me, their owners want that from me too. But I'm not really thinking when I'm doing the painting that, oh, I need to, you know, express this certain personality or character trait, because a lot of times I'm lucky if I spend 15 minutes around these horses, you know. But I do hear that an awful lot from owners and collectors, you know, that I've captured the personality of the horse.
And I've had the privilege of being here for the past couple months while your show has been up.
Uh-huh.
Every day, people are just amazed by it, and just like awe-inspired by the beauty and the humanity in these horses that you captured.
Well, thank you. That's nice to know. I appreciate you saying that. I do think that, you know, I noticed this when I didn't set foot inside an art museum until I was Easter weekend of my senior year in high school. We visited relatives in Philadelphia, and my first cousin took me to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and it was the last day of the Vincent van Gogh retrospective. And that was when I really decided, yeah, being an artist is cool. You know, you could do that for a living. But I've lost track. I got on a tangent. I was thinking about that was such a fantastic show at the museum. Any other questions? Yes.
Related to the eyes, but in general for the horse's anatomy, is there a part of the horse that you enjoy painting the most, or is there a part that you find the most challenging? Or is it all the same to you?
No, it's definitely not all the same. And, you know, all the horses that compete in show jumping are, I mean, there's some thoroughbreds, you know, off retired racetrack even. And, you know, the reason they're fast is because they have long, spindly legs. But, you know, they weigh roughly 1,200 pounds. So they've got this, I mean, they're beautiful, but they're also, it's kind of an odd setup. And it's amazing to me that any of them stay healthy for long periods of time with what they're asked to do, with these long, spindly legs that have to absorb, you know, the shock of landing and taking off and doing that over and over and over and over for their whole career. I'm, you know, when I was studying at BRAHM Academy, I got criticized several times because I'd have this lovely naked woman in front of me posing, and I'd just paint her like shoulders and head because I was really interested in that, you know. And you know, obviously I painted the full body, but you know, I was there to become a better portrait painter. And for me, and that's one of the reasons I crop these things so tightly, the head is the most interesting part of the body. And I've told clients many times who say, oh, I love my horse's conformation, I want you to paint it full length. I say, okay, but just let me tell you, I said, what's your favorite part of your horse? Oh, he has such a beautiful face and lovely eyes. I said, well, yeah, you know, and that's, I mean, I understand why you love everything about him, because you're climbing on top of him and competing with him and experiencing his moods and everything else. But isn't his head the most important part? And you know, if I paint him full length, his head's going to be this big. But if I paint him and crop his head and neck, his head's going to be this big. So what do you think? You know, if you want to see his personality, then big is better. And now I remember why I was talking about Philadelphia Museum of Art. That's, when I went there, that's when I saw all these big paintings. You know, when you go in museums, you see big paintings. And I was blown away by that. I was like, you know, okay, you know, when you get to the point where you're showing in museums, you paint big. So, you know, when I was trying to recover from the recession, I thought, well, yeah, now I'm going to paint big, you know. And there was the other thing that, you know, portraits are family heirlooms, and therefore they tend to retain a higher value than just paintings that are hung on walls and sold through galleries or whatever, or even directly. And, you know, they pull at the emotional heartstrings, obviously. They're family members. So I knew I couldn't charge the same for a 24 by 30 painting that had no relation to the person that was viewing it, considering taking it home. So I thought, well, if I paint big, if I expand, I wanted to do it anyway, but I thought, you know, if I paint big, if I paint 4 times the size I've been painting, then I can justify charging roughly the same price that I was charging for, you know, 24 by 30 equestrian portrait. Does that answer your question? Yeah, so the head and the neck, for sure, is my favorite part. I enjoy painting full length, but you know, if I only had to paint head and necks for the rest of my life, I'd be okay with that. Yes?
I'm fascinated by kids who know pretty early what they want to do in life and sort of self-select for that and stick with it.
Right.
And you said you started at 6. And when we were in junior high and high school, you were known as the artist in the class. In
No.
school. Yes, you were. I remember you were good. You drew.
Well, yeah.
You might not have thought you were good, but we thought you were good.
Okay.
And so I'm curious, do you think it was genetic? Do you have family members who were talented in art? Did somebody encourage you to start doing it?
You know, I thought for the longest time that I was just, you know, no, that I just happened. There was no art in the house when I grew up. There were no art books. In fact, I remember pulling out the P volume of the World Book and Encyclopedia because it had painting, and it had like 12 paintings that were in there that were postage stamp size. And I would keep pulling that out and looking at it all the time. Yeah, it's hard for me to keep it together when I see those paintings in museums today. Dr. Payne and I went to junior high and high school together. This is the first time we've seen each other since a reunion about 20 years ago. Nobody really pushed, none of the art instructors in junior high or high school really pushed me to improve my drawing skills. The focus of art education then was variety, so that people who liked art could see what they were most interested in. You know, pottery and sculpture and mosaics and you name it. So everything I was doing, I was kind of doing, I felt like I was doing it on my own. And to make matters worse, you know, and that's well, at least for that period of my life, I was concerned about who was cool and who wasn't, and there weren't any artists that were cool. You know, so I literally, I was an athlete. You know, I wasn't. I was on the track team. I was actually a pole vaulter and a broad jumper, but and people thought sports were cool, but I didn't really hear that about art. So I would actually go in the back entrance to the building where they had the art classes. And because I didn't want to be walking around with all my art stuff. And, I mean, that's the way, I got over that immediately when I was in college and I was in art school. But yeah, that's kind of, so when you say that I was known as an artist, that surprises me. I mean, that's nice, but that surprises me.
I've got the drawing in my yearbook, so I'm going to hold on to that.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
All right, we've got time for one more question. There's
Okay.
one here.
Yes,
Your work is magnificent.
Oh, thank you.
so much for coming here.
my pleasure.
And talking to us. I was curious, and did you study the anatomy of the horses a lot? Did you work with someone who helped explain like the structure of the horse? And because your detail is just so, on point and muscular, and I didn't know if you did a lot of studying of the actual anatomy of the animal, or just kind of came along with starting to work with them.
Good question. When I first started exhibiting at horse shows, I was clueless. And I was trying to absorb as much as I could, as fast as I could. And there are certain people who love to tell you what's wrong.
Sure.
And so that was actually very helpful. And I've always appreciated negative criticism because I get a lot of I've always gotten a lot of compliments. When people say, I don't like this so much, I'll ask them why. And I'll think about what they're saying, And sometimes I go, well, I disagree. And sometimes I go, well, I hadn't really thought about that, And yeah, I think you've got a point. And that's also how I work with clients. I had people pointing out mistakes I made with tack, mistakes I made with anatomy. It probably seemed like it happened more than it actually did because, it hit me kind of hard. But because I was doing my best, to try and fit in and impress all the equestrians I was showing my work to. There's a George Stubbs he's one of my few 18th century painters, like Stubbs and Chardin, I just absolutely love. And George Stubbs, I love his paintings. It was so wonderful being at Lime Academy because we were 28 miles from the Yale campus. And Mellon donated the bulk of his sporting art collection there, and they had a bunch of Stubbs, a bunch of Munnings, just amazing. So George Stubbs would, and this is a guy who was wearing a three-cornered hat at the same time George Washington was. He was hauling stuff like dead carcasses up into his studio with a winch to flay them and study the musculature and the bones. And he put together a book that someone told me, I haven't confirmed this, but that it's still at most equine veterinary schools today. What his studies are still that valid. And I have a copy of that book, and it is amazing. It's very, very vertical, very tall. But yeah, I looked at that extensively, and I had a few books on the horse and equine anatomy, animal anatomy. I did study those pretty closely, and then when someone would mention a part of the horse that I wasn't familiar with, then I would go look it up and try and be aware of that. But definitely I've always made an effort, because I'm not an equestrian, to get things right, with anatomy and with tack. And, most of the time it works. There was one photo session where we didn't realize it until we looked at the reference photos that the D bit was not attached. And it was just flopped over to the side. The D bit is part of the bridle, you know, that attaches to the bit that's in the mouth, and one of them was just hanging off the side, and none of us noticed it until the photo session was over. But fortunately, it's one of the advantages you have if you're a painter. You can fix things like that pretty easy, which I did, and everybody's happy.
That's beautiful.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Thank you.